acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. And while we meet on a virtual platform, we do want to acknowledge the importance of these lands that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. And so from coast to coast to coast, we celebrate and gratefully acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So welcome, Peter. We have wanted to have you on for quite some time. It is a delight to have you joining us today to View and Beyond.
Thanks. It's great to be here, and I've tuned in from time to time. You guys are doing a really important piece, I think, by bringing people together in this platform. So thanks.
Now, for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now that you're kind of retired?
Yeah, thanks. So I was ordained in the Diocese of Niagara in 1980. And after some perambulations around Southern Ontario, including a stint at the national office, I moved to Vancouver, where I was Dean of Christ Church Cathedral from 1994 till 2019, retiring at the end of September of 2019, which turned out to be sort of interesting time to retire. And in retirement, which retirement is a moment, right? It's I think ministry continues, work continues. I've been privileged to continue to work a bit, and I love the work that I'm able to do. I've been doing a number of things. I'm adjunct faculty at Vancouver School of Theology, where I teach courses primarily in leadership. I have a private practice as a coach and a consultant. I've done some writing for the Anglican Journal in arts and culture, and I co-host a podcast on gospel and musical theater with my friend Nathan LaRude, who's the Dean of Trinity Cathedral, Portland. So all of that and a daily walk out by English Bay here in Vancouver fills in the days nicely.
Well, we're glad that you still have your hands in all kinds of different things in ministry these days. It sounds like that you're very much on growing edge of what seems to be happening in terms of the transformation of our church, and not only ours, but mainline churches in the West for sure, and working with students, but also working with folks who are busy and engaged in ministry on the ground. I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you're seeing? I mean, like you mentioned, you retired at an interesting time. You've been really able to observe. Yeah,
one of the pieces of work I'm doing as a consultant these days is with two other consultants working with the Diocese of Toronto as Toronto Diocese seeks a new vision for its future. And in that work, we've been doing a lot of listening and had numerous focus groups. We've talked to over 200 clergy and over 500 laity, and then analyze all that data. And it was one evening we were with a group of clergy, a focus group of clergy, and one of the priests in the Diocese of Toronto said something like this: "We are dealing with intersecting crises." And the crises that she identified that were intersecting were the pandemic, obviously, the ecological crisis, the war in Ukraine, and the decline of institutional religion in North America and Western Europe. She said those four intersecting crises are affecting us all deeply and really leaving us in a certain way, those of us who are close to the life of the institutional church, in a certain kind of trauma, really. And I've been reflecting on her statement ever since she first said it and thinking about one of those crises would have been enough. To strain resources and leadership, but all of them coming together has created, I think, a very challenging, difficult environment for the church to navigate through. When in the natural world, I'm a great follower of Teilhard de Chardin, and kind of one of the faculty members at Vancouver School of Theology for many, many years was the late, great Sally McFaig, the eco-theologian who kept on helping us reference the earth. If there are intersecting crises in the earth, right, it means that some evolutionary leap is probably going to happen, and adaptation is what's called for. And I think what's happening now in the church, from my little vantage point, is that we're in the midst of an evolutionary adaptational change that we don't really even understand because it's happening with us and through us. And let me give one example, then I'll shut up. So one of the things that happened in terms of the pandemic as a crisis and the shutdowns that ensued afterwards was that institutional churches, the Anglican Church, for example, were forced to make an alliance with the digital world. We'd been talking about it in the life of the church for decades, and church structures didn't really lend themselves well to being involved in the digital world. But all of a sudden, here we were, and across the country, from coast to coast to coast, in the 30-some dioceses of the Canadian Church, people had to learn how to live stream or work on Zoom or find platforms beyond the church buildings that we're in. Clergy were suddenly having to become techies in a certain way. Some adapted very quickly to that, some didn't. And now, live streaming, some way to meet virtually online, I think is here to stay. It's an adaptation. It's still very rough. We're not pioneers. We're hacking through woods, and it's pretty awful, some of what I see. Some of it's quite wonderful, but the adaptation's taking a while. And I don't think that adaptation, let me do it the positive way. I think this adaptation is the tip of the iceberg in terms of how does the gospel connect to the digital world? Because human beings are now largely technologically oriented. I mean, look at this. Here we are. In the old days, we would have had to rent a hall, pay airfares for people to get together, bring groups together. That's not as necessary anymore as it once was. I'm not saying that actual in-person meetings aren't good, but we live in a technological world. And the adaptation of the crisis of the pandemic has accelerated that adaptation.
Look, I made it. I'm in again.
Yay.
So I'm coming to you today, speaking of traveling to places, from Toronto, from the head office of the Anglican Church, the heartbeat, the beating heart of the Anglican Church of Canada, for a meeting of the spiritual resources for discipleship people we're planning. So we're going to break in on them later. But I'm thrilling to be here and just to see some of the life that's happening in the church.
Great.
Peter, I agree in terms of the technology. I think you're right in terms of we haven't seen really what this is going to mean for us in so many ways. You mentioned earlier about us being in trauma. And I've not studied, what in terms of the psychology behind trauma, but what does that mean for us as church? I mean, obviously, this means it's going to take time for us to heal, to live this new normal. What else, as you use that term, do you see for us in thinking about the trauma?
Yeah, I mean, the textbook on it is written by the president of Union Theological Seminary, Serene Jones, Serne Jones. It's called Trauma and Grace. It's her doctoral dissertation. She spent a lot of time talking to survivors from people who were in concentration camps and so forth and living with it. I think one of the great resources that the church has in relationship to trauma is that every year we liturgically move again through trauma through the Paschal Triduum, right? From Palm Sunday to Easter Day, for those who have the gumption, the courage, and the fortitude, we actually, it's almost like we willingly re-traumatize ourselves again by standing at the foot of the cross. And by taking that moment, I'm preaching this week in Portland at the Cathedral, so these are the themes that are in my mind. But, it's the Palm Sunday Passion reading, the only time in the life of the church that we don't have acclamations on either side of the gospel reading, right? It ends with Jesus really being a failure. And more than that, it ends with the story of his crucifixion and the trauma of his disciples as they watched helplessly. Then we move through the proclamation of to Easter, obviously. My point is, I think we're well positioned as followers of Jesus to understand and have some resources to work through the spiritual challenges that trauma brings. And it seems to me, just two of them, and then I'll, one is, it's really important to acknowledge the kind of helplessness and the grief before moving to, well, things are going to get better. And Christians, I think, are often a little too quick to jump to the things are going to get better, to the hope side. We, in our podcast, Nathan and I talked to a rabbi and cantor from Portland, Oregon, and they were unfolding how for the Jews in their annual recitation of Passover and so forth, they move really from trauma to trauma to trauma. As a people, the history is not that everything turns out. In fact, it's things kind of get worse, they get better, and then they get worse again, right? That's and so he was being teasingly critical of Christians always jumping to Easter, always jumping to resolution. So I think that's the first part of trauma, is to acknowledge where we are. And then the second part, and this is where the evolutionary piece comes in, is to be open to the surprise that awaits us on the other side of evolutionary adaptation. That's what Easter is about. Easter is about tomorrow, always about tomorrow, always about a new future being open. But it's not the way that the disciples had imagined it. And I think similarly for us, as we move through these intersecting crises and the traumas, it's really kind of important to be agnostic about what's ahead. We don't know. We don't know what it is that we are being made ready for here.
I love that. So perhaps have a learning mind, an open mind, yeah, a willingness.
To live into the trauma as opposed to try to deny it. Yeah, yep. Sorry, Lisa.
Okay, and I was just going to add humility.
Yes. And humility, of course, as we all know from our etymology, right, comes from humus, from the earth, means being close to the earth. The other intersecting crises that I don't think I mentioned off the top is, of course, the ecological crisis. Certainly in British Columbia, and I think across Canada, I know certainly in the Maritimes and Eastern Canada, in Central Canada and the West as well, we've had extreme weather, like storms like have never been seen before. And most of us, I think, would agree that this is caused by climate change, by the interventions that human beings have made since the Industrial Revolution to try to manage the planet. And the planet is saying, you don't manage me, I manage you. And but that's had a huge impact on us as well. And we are having to adapt, once again, to use the adaptation word.
I just want to say a few hellos. People are really loving all this. Peter Misashek from Toronto says hello. Lynn Usens here. Chris Hoffman, he's from BC, I think, from Burnaby. And Jonathan Halliwell. Now, Jonathan, who's a regular commentator on our Pew and Beyond, said a couple of things in response to what you were saying. He says, COVID interrupted or even devastated our hopes for renewal in the long term. Trauma coming out of a steady decline over the preceding decades.
Yeah.
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 But I think what you're saying is so right about let's not deny it. Denial isn't helpful, is it? But that hopeful feeling about what's on the other side.
Yeah, and we kind of have to puzzle our way through it right now, it seems to me. All of this has not shaken my faith in God, but it has helped reimagine what that faith might look like. One of Sally McFay's great images of Christ is the nurse log. So anybody who's been on the west coast of British Columbia and walked in a forest know that there's this phenomenon where trees, either through windstorm or whatever, that are toppled, lie on the ground. And as they lie there and decay, they become a place where new life begins to spring up. It's kind of, it's on the cover of one of Sally's books. A picture, the technical name, botanists call it a nurse log. So, and it is an image of the Paschal mystery, right? A tree has died and new life grows out of it. It's quite amazing. I mean, we live right next to Stanley Park, so get to walk in the forest quite often and see this over and over again. And I see it as an image of the Paschal mystery and of Christ. And I think our greatest hope for the church is that it might become a nurse log. As, of course, the population of Canada, the church buildings across Canada have popped up. Oh, another thing I should have intersected in our crises was, of course, in the midst of the pandemic, the confirmation of the children who had died and been buried in unmarked graves in residential schools across the country. And you think of these Gothic revival churches. I mean, I served one for 25 years and I loved it. But our churches all kind of look like these replicas of European churches done in a kind of Canadian sort of way. And that can be traumatizing for anyone who has had the experience of church as oppressor, like Indigenous people, for example. Like gay, lesbian, transgender people, for example, like women for decades, and because of the decline, church buildings are being sold in every diocese across the country. How can we become the nurse logs, the places where new life can sprout, maybe in a different way than what has fallen? Often the plants, the things that grow out of trees that have fallen are of a different species than the tree. What is it that we are being called to become? And we're only going to discover that as we kind of live into the complexity of life in the midst of these intersecting crises.
People are loving that metaphor. Yeah, lots of likes. Church as the nurse log.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes.
I mean, I've heard it that we're growing into more of being midwives, and so I think that connects with that beautiful metaphor. I'm wondering, as you work in leadership development as a consultant and coach, Peter, and obviously in terms of your work at the Cathedral and other places, how will the leadership of our church, what do you see happening in terms of the transformation that's happening there? I
Yeah,
mean, there's a conversation about kind of flattened structures and some of those things.
yeah. I think two things. One is, I believe our church, and because I'm an Anglican, we'll just talk about the Anglican Church today, but it could apply to others as well, needs to rediscover the power of testimony. The story of how it is that our lives have been met and transformed by God in Christ. Clergy need to, I think, be more articulate about that from their own experience, their own faith journeys, to tell that story. And I think clergy need to be working to equip the laity, the saints, to tell that story. The course that we never taught at Christ Church Cathedral that was always on my, we're going to do this next year, was how to talk about your faith to your non-religious family and friends. I think because of the structure of Anglican liturgy, too often the laity, and this is not their fault, become passive participants rather than active. And there's nothing like having to tell the story of your encounter of God in Christ, what that was like. And it doesn't have to be at an evangelical rally or a charismatic prayer meeting, although it may have been. For some people, where they have encountered God in Christ is, for example, sitting at a music concert and just feeling the interconnectedness with the other human beings at that. This happens at rock concerts, at pop music concerts all the time. If you really want to see a community come together, it's there. For me, I'm old-fashioned. It will happen at a symphony orchestra playing Brahms, right? And that's where I experience a transcendent. Or, because I'm West Coast, a beauty of a sunset, right? You just have the sense that there is more to life. Or often where our hearts are broken and someone has reached out and brought good news to us and compassion and healing, and we experience the living Christ that way. So the power of testimony, to be able to tell that story. And I think clergy have a job to equip laity to tell that story. Because I think laity feel uncomfortable about it. And understandably, I mean, I feel uncomfortable when I'm with my non-religious, my non-Christian friends, and the subject moves to religion, because they're so critical, because of the very bad history of the church on all sorts of fronts. Colonization, the role of women, the place of gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, two-spirited people. I mean, it just piles up. So that's one thing. And the second is related to it, I think, and that is, in my work with clergy, what should we do when we're starting off in a congregation? That's a lot of my clients are starting new ministries. Say, you find ways to get out and listen to where people are at. Save your program ideas till later. Preach the sermons that you've got in the can. Get out of the office. Maybe you can meet some people over Zoom. That can work really well, or FaceTime or whatever. But if you can actually sit down in somebody's home and say, tell me about yourself, not tell them about the church, what's going on in your life. And to do that repeatedly with as many members of the parish as you can do, to learn what people are carrying, what they're struggling with, where they're needing good news. I don't think until you really know the people that you're called to lead, know them, not generalize about these people that you see in front of you on a Sunday morning. That's a diminishing number of people that you see in front of you, but really know them, see where they live, see what their lives are like. Then, with emotional intelligence, and the grace of the Holy Spirit and the love of God, you can maybe provide those moments in liturgy where people will experience the good news of God in Christ.
I was just thinking as you were talking about being really curious, and obviously in that humility, and asking questions. And I think as you started with our beginning of Pew and Beyond today, about saying about that deep listening. So yeah, and this is not rocket science.
No. No, and I'm a great fan of the fourth gospel. It's where I've done most of my Bible study, just because it's so rich. So Jesus' first words in John's gospel are, "What do you seek?" Right? Before he says anything, before he starts preaching, what do you seek? And it seems to me that's kind of a cue to just what you were saying, Lisa, about curiosity. Like, how can we become more curious about the lives of the people who we serve as clergy, as leaders in the church, as opposed to trying to recruit them into institutional religious life? Harold Percy, one of my heroes in the life of the church, said, that number one, we don't train clergy, we don't tell them what their job is. And number two, he asked the question, this was in the decade of evangelism, which I was staff person for when I worked at the national office, so not very successful, obviously, but he said, what does an evangelize, his question was, what does an evangelized person look like? If our job is to share the good news with someone, what are we hoping that their life looks like? Are we seeking to make compliant church members who take on institutional jobs, like wardens and treasurers, and keep the institution functioning? Or is it something else? I think it's something else. I think it's something around a quality of life, an ability to be forgiving, a capacity to include folks other than ourselves, a willingness to reach out beyond our insular lives into other people's lives, a deep caring about justice and about equity and about the earth. I think that's what an evangelized person, those are some of but it's a much longer list what an evangelized person looks like. I think a lot of times we're still trying, I hear clergy being very frustrated. Nobody's coming to church. Nobody wants to be a warden. Nobody wants to be the treasurer of the church. And I think, so did Jesus come to found a religious institution and it's our responsibility to keep the institution going? Or did Jesus come to begin a movement of love and justice in the world? And the institution has been a vehicle that has proclaimed that. The institution is very close to my heart. I mean, this is all very hard to say, but I don't think that we're called just to keep the institution alive. I do think we're called to keep the gospel alive.
Yeah, and how do institutional structures, we need structures, someone has to pay the bills, but how does that serve the gospel as opposed to the other way around? Yeah. I think it's getting, go ahead. No, carry on with your thought, but there's a question out in there I want to bring in, but.
Well, let's go to the question.
Okay, that was Peter Misashchik just commenting on what you said a bit earlier. He goes, well, how do clergy, many of whom never rebooted a church, reboot their church?
Right. And what does reboot mean and what does church mean? Right. Yeah. It's fascinating to see it's fascinating to ponder what it might mean if our focus was extending the movement, the Jesus movement, as Bishop Michael Curry calls it, presiding bishop in the Episcopal Church, and how the institutional church can be a servant of that. I think sometimes we do it the other way around, right? We have to make the institutional church survive. So I guess we better get spiritual, no, I think we need to connect with people's lives, find out where God and Christ is moving in their life and work, and then see how the institution might follow. I don't. So yeah, the other point was what would cross through my mind. I think we're coming to a kind of crossroads in the life of the church, in so many places where it's either going to be the building or the stipendiary clergy. It can't have both. Communities, as they have shrunk, can't afford the upkeep of the building and the clergy salary and benefits and pension plan. Now, I used to be on the side of the clergy on this one, and I still believe in a learned clergy and ordained ministry and all those sorts of things. But the laity, in a small, struggling church building, often say, clergy come, clergy go, clergy, smurgy, the building is here. This is where for generations we have worshiped God, and we can find other ways to do that. We don't need clergy. Clergy are saying, you don't need a building. You can be anywhere, you can be in a field, you can be in a storefront. And so we've got this kind of really interesting conversation. And probably, being an Anglican, it's probably somewhere in between, I guess, right? As Leonard Cohen put it, somewhere in between those two. But I think, and this is hard for clergy to say, and it's rich for me, and I'm in a privileged position as as a pensioner of the Anglican Church Canada, the General Synod pension plan. But it may be at a time when the number of stipendiary ordained clergy is going to decrease, may not be as available as a career path. And I lament that. I mean, I love clergy. I are one. So Peter, I don't know how to respond to you. How do you reboot a parish congregation? I guess I go real basic on that. Get to know the people who are there, who are committed with you as the priest in the enterprise. Find out where it is that God is moving in their lives and start there. Start by listening.
Peter says, yes, yes, yes. We are at a crossroads. For long, we've said we need to uphold the inherited church, but now that's not working anymore. Yeah.
Peter, I'm intrigued by what you said about, I'm just paraphrasing here, obviously, so if I don't get it quite right, you can clarify, but looking at the outcomes of our ministry work, like what is the why? If it's an evangelized person, or using different language, obviously now in 2023, what is our why for the ministry work? And if we're faithful in that, I wonder if in those places where we need paid clergy, there will be paid clergy, or if we need buildings, or both. And I think we are seeing that when we have some clarity around our why. I think it's not, obviously attendance on Sunday morning and envelopes and all those kinds of things, or programs. I wonder, I heard somebody share about a conversation that had happened at Lambeth, and I think it was a bishop who said, I wonder if this is why God is not blessing us. Because perhaps we're focusing on the wrong why in some way, that if we're truly listening and faithful, and that's easier for me to say too, right? Because I have a paycheck right now. Today I do. Recognizing it, there's going to be a cost, obviously, to that. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that, about being that clarity of the why? And
yeah, no, I think you're onto something. The great Simon Sinek TED Talk, the power of why. Why is it that we do what we do, as opposed to the what and the how? The what and the how tend to dominate church conversations. How do you make the budget at the end of the year? What are you doing for Lent this year? For all those things. why are we doing what we're doing? What is the what is the call really? And will God bless us if? Well, I think God blesses us regardless of what we do. Theologically, I'm a universalist, so I believe the whole family of humanity is blessed by and loved by God, loved with an infinite and eternal love, and called to be free, called to be who we are, right? Um, but why do we do what we do? And again, I'm sorry to keep going back to this deep listening in our consulting work in the Diocese of Toronto. We started in around this time last year, and we had hoped that we would have all our listening done by the end of January, and we're still listening. Focus groups, clergy groups, and people want to talk about their experience of the church, their hopes for the future. But in the lay consultations, the local consultations that we've had over and over again, what people are saying is, we don't have the energy to do what we have been doing in the way that we've been doing it anymore. Volunteers aren't coming back. The seniors who are less able-bodied now because of age, that happens to us, are really quite happy meeting on Zoom on Sunday morning. Thank you very much. We want to connect, but the ways that we have had of connecting in the past aren't working for us. We're tired. We're running out of money. We need to find some new ways. I don't think that's unique to the Diocese of Toronto. I'm fortunate enough to have clergy clients right across the country, and I just hear this over and over again in my coaching practice. So how is it that we can go into the heart of the gospel, the Paschal mystery? Because if our hope is to keep the institutional church going in the form that it is, that's the wrong thing to hope for, in my humble opinion. The Paschal mystery tells us that there's something, unless the grain of wheat dies and falls into the ground, it remains but a single grain, Jesus says in the fourth gospel. Some things are dying. Things are dying now in the life of the church. That should not discourage us as followers of the way. That's our core story. And that's the story of evolution. When intersecting forces in the natural world happen, it means there's an adaptation, there's a change about to happen. Things are going to be different. Things are going to be different. How? But I think you're onto something, Lisa. Getting to the why, getting to the call of the kingdom of God that Christ proclaims in all four gospels and through the work of Paul and so forth, and through the history of the church. And maybe kind of, like a snake sheds its skin, and as we all shed our skin,
Lynn Usen says, sorry, she's commenting on what you're saying. She goes, "We are preaching to a society that's death-defying."
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Maybe I think of No, we had this author a couple of weeks ago, Kevin Makins, who's a founder of our church in Hamilton, and he's been sort of rediscovering and reincorporating some of the things we have. And he said, "Do you have any idea how countercultural Ash Wednesday is?" I mean, do you realize it's the one thing no one can hijack? No one sells Ash Wednesday chocolates. And you give me this message that you're going to die,
Pretty much.
And I thought, oh yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah. And I think Lynn, you're really onto that, the death denying culture, right? All of the rites around funerals and death notices, people pass away, they pass on, or they just pass these days. Nobody really, funerals have become celebrations of life, I'm often, in my time at the Cathedral, where I officiated at more funerals than I never counted how many, it's probably just as well. I was often the only person who would speak at the funeral, since people like to have remembrances and so forth, who actually said the word death.
Yeah.
Someone has died here, right? And death for Christians isn't the enemy. I think that's what Paul is saying over and over again. That's
It's not the worst thing.
Not the worst thing. It is natural. It happens to us all. I was fond of saying at the Cathedral, none of us get out of this thing alive. And I think none of us get out of this thing alive includes the institutional church in the forms that we have received it. And I am fascinated to see what it is that God is making of us, and hope to be part of it as opposed to standing in its way.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Mm.
Yeah.
I know I always have to challenge myself on that. How much am I trying to preserve something I grew up in and loved?
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. Me too. Being part of whatever it is. Yeah. Go, Lisa.
And yet we are returning to this Paschal mystery story again, journeying with Christ to the cross, to death, to the tomb, and to new life, as you started about, and you talked about Easter. And this is our central story. I mean, this is who we are. And yet we want to be like Mary and hold on to this wounded Jesus in some way and hold on. And it's obviously it's natural, it's being humans, but also perhaps we have a message for the world as well, as this as the world tries to hold on to that which is not life-giving as well. I mean, how might we be leaders in some way, salt and light, obviously, in terms of the community, not just kind of self-preserving and worried about our stuff,
right,
to a world that is worried about death. And the economy is another one of those crises, with inflation.
There you go. Yeah,
so much that we could, as a people of the way of love, we might have something to say about that.
Yeah, indeed. The impact in the disparity, the injustice of the distribution of wealth in a capitalistic society and a capitalistic world is obscene, right? In Canada, certainly in Vancouver, but I think in metropolitan centers across the country, the number of homeless people on the streets is increasing. The amount of addiction, because I think the world is just too much to bear. And then the the migrants who are seeking to escape from totalitarian regimes and find hope somewhere, find new life somewhere. These are the pressing realities of the world in which followers of Jesus, it seems to me, we should be on the front line of saying this is wrong, this is unjust, this is cruel. This is not the flourishing of life that the gospel calls us to, as opposed to seeking to shore up our religious institutions in the midst of change. So is it a kind of voluntary relinquishment, voluntary relinquishment of wealth and property for the sake of the gospel? Is it letting go rather than seeking to prop up ministries who are past their best before date? They served an important purpose for a number of years, but now time has come. They have died. Sell the land, make that in some way available for greater justice in the world, that resource. Or do we put it in the consolidated trust fund of our dioceses to continue to shore up places that really, sadly, and I speak as someone, my home parish was closed. The place where I encountered Christ first, where I was baptized and confirmed, where I tried my vocation, all those sorts of things. I drive by it now in St. Catharines, Ontario, and it's not there. That's okay. It was a vehicle. It was a time. It was a place. It was an agent of the gospel of Christ. It changed my life and the lives of many others. But you know, Isaiah says, the prophet Isaiah says, the former things have passed away. Look, I'm doing a new thing, God says. Doing a new thing.
Yeah.
And that faith legacy has been passed on to you, Peter, and to others as you've ministered and as you've,
Right.
I mean, that it's not disappeared. The
Right.
building not be there in the same way. Yeah,
I
it's
love that.
honoring.
And a new thing. I love that. That's to me a word of hope. Let's hold on. Let's really look at. I've got a lovely little example of a new thing happening right behind me. Shall I go there?
Go
Yes.
for it.
So where I am right now, as I said, I'm in the heartbeat, the heart of the Anglican Church of Canada. I'm in the church house in Toronto, and our group that really sponsors Pew and Beyond, the Spiritual Resources for Discipleship group. A bunch of us are meeting right now behind me, and we are planning something. So I think we should just surprise them. I didn't tell them I was doing this. Been an awful lot of laughter in this room. And look, oh, there's some people here. But you know what? There are like there's stuff all over the wall. Look how this is what we've been doing. So you can tell that we've been hard at work. Everywhere you look on this wall, there are plans and lists, and it's really exciting. And here they are. Can you see everyone? Can't really see everyone. There's Jessica and Rhonda and Jay. And here, I'm going to just come and gather around my shoulder, everyone. Can you hear us?
Oh,
Look.
gather around.
Yeah.
Hi, Jessica.
Hey, Peter, good to see you.
Good to see you. Hi, Rhonda. Gosh, this is fun. Can I join you for lunch or whatever?
Over. So, like, what are we doing here? Why are
Hi,
we here?
Jay.
Hi, Peter.
So save the date, April 19th to 21st, 2024. We're putting on a spiritual formation conference.
Excellent.
So cool. Why are we doing that? Why do we think it's a good idea?
Jessica said so.
Yeah. No, because spiritual formation is like the furnace for the church and its mission.
And I think, yeah, so much of what you were talking about, you know, a new beginning, life, the church being, I love that as the mother log. That starts, you know, in our hearts, doesn't it? In our spirits, in those wonderful gifts that we have.
And it's the remembering the why, right? Why do we do all the rest of it?
Oh my gosh,
Where
we
does
were
it come from?
just talking about that.
Wow, so connected.
This, yes.
Well, we just had Simon here us recently. So no, I'm kidding. But the other thing is the aspirational piece that the Anglican Church is named for itself. It's that deep engagement that centered everything else. So this spiritual formation isn't just sort of one stream of programming in the church. It is the foundational bit. It's the leaven, if you will. That's an image which we've been playing with. And
Yeah, expect to hear a lot about leaven. We talked about salt and light, but we're talking about leaven, bread making, beer making, maybe too,
Yogurt.
Yogurt.
yogurt. So
Wine.
Wine.
oh, wine.
Well, you know, it's great that both the symbols of Eucharist, bread and wine, are made through processes of transformation, right? Of change. And obviously we're in a deep moment of change here. And I love it that you're focusing on spiritual formation. We were talking about the importance of testimony and rediscovering that for clergy and for laity to be able to speak with conviction and some confidence about where people have discovered life in Christ. And speak about that with neighbors and family and friends in their affinity circles.
one of the practices that have sort of fallen by the wayside, but is an actual deep traditional practice of the church is testimony. Yeah.
Is testimony. Yeah.
So we got some
I think we need a season of testimony.
people are giving lots of hearts, and it's going to be April, what did we say, 19th to 21st?
That's right.
So show up on Thursday, the 18th, if you can.
Yeah.
And it's going to be at the Queen of the Apostles in Mississauga. So I would circle that
And
date.
we're inviting people to come as teams.
Yes.
So find your people.
Another word we were playing with is fermentation. you know, Kreider's book, The Patient Fermentation of the Early Church, and there's that sense of life bubbling up, and that plays in with the leaven piece too, I think.
So check it out, everyone. Be here. This is kind of what Pew and Beyond is all about. And this is Pew and Beyond and members from across the country of our church and our group working on spiritual formation and doing something that needs to be done. So we're kind of finding ways of fermenting in that. But I'll let you all get back to work. We gotta go.
Have fun.
Bye, everyone. And look, lots of,
Bye.
you can tell we're really planning. There's just so many of these sheets on the wall. Like, how Anglican is that?
Totally Anglican. You're in the boardroom. I know that room well.
Yeah.
That's the room that has all the crests of the dioceses. And when Michael Piers was the primate, and he had to sit in that room a lot, he looked to see how many diocesan coats of arms had canoes in them. And it's an amazing number, actually, because the colonized history of our church was that many of the dioceses people could only get to by way of water and canoe, and the canoe became a symbol of the missionary enterprise. And of course, the missionaries wouldn't have known anything about canoes if it weren't for Indigenous people. We found those who colonized the church were only able to get there because of the wisdom of Indigenous elders from generations. So it's quite an interesting set of symbols on the wall there, Neil. You can examine them when you go back in. Thank
you, Peter. It's been a great job. I got to get back to work.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
And we'll have to have you back. There's so much to talk about, and you have so much to offer. We really appreciate your sharing today.
Well, it's a privilege to be with you, and I think the work you're doing, this virtual Pew and Beyond, and the work you're doing, Neil, with that fabulous group of people, and work in Nova Scotia and PEI, just so important to be raising these questions and having these conversations. So it's a privilege to be part of it. Thanks for asking me on.
Thank you. Pew and Beyond is an initiative of the Spiritual Formation for Discipleship Network of the Anglican Church of Canada. Join us next week. It's Holy Week, special guest.
You bet. Take care, everyone. Bye.